is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arabs Network on all social media platforms.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another great episode on the program, The Bridge on US Arab Radio. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. We are talking today about the most important, most timely topic, the Gaza crisis. And we're going to talk about covering Gaza, media frames, disinformation, and conflicting narratives. And with me this morning discussing this important and timely topic is Mr. Omar Rahman, who is a fellow with the Middle East Council on Global Affairs and also a seasoned journalist. And with me also is Mr. Mike Sexton, who is an expert on cybersecurity and Middle East affairs. Welcome to the program, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Omar, I'll start with you with a question about the dominant frames in Western media coverage. How do you perceive the dominant frames that have been overtaking Western media when talking about the unfolding crisis in Gaza?
Thank you, Sahar. Coming from a journalism background, I spent most of my career as a journalist, not as a policy analyst, as well as, I have a master's degree from Columbia School of Journalism. I've been, rather shocked at what I've seen from the Western press in terms of covering this issue since October 7th. I had no, it's not like I was naive when it came to that. I've been watching that coverage my whole life. And to be honest, for years now, I barely watch American broadcast media because I don't think it does a very good job. I get most of my information from the written press. But at the same time, when we have these type of roles, it's incumbent on us to pay attention to, how the press actually is covering the issue, because it is not, it's a player in these things. It helps shape public opinion, and public opinion is important when in this whole thing, because it helps drive policy. It's as Noam Chomsky has put it, in terms of manufacturing consent, it's a player in all of this. And so what I've seen from the Western media, from the broadcast media, from the CNN, the Fox News, MSNBC, et cetera, BBC, has been shocking in the sense that how one-sided it is, how often it is just repeating, parroting the Israeli military line, how much it has dispensed with any context whatsoever for weeks into this whole situation. How little it's done to actually cover what's happening inside Gaza itself, relying on the Israelis when they've gone into Gaza. And again, part of this is the constraints that Israel imposes on journalists. But you see something like, CNN correspondents embedding with the Israeli military, going into Gaza, and then, being spoon-fed from a military spokesman inside of a hospital, and then agreeing to allow their news coverage to go through Israel's military censors. So, at what point in the line is this going to be, a non-biased coverage? So what we've seen, I think, in terms of the framing is, more often than not, or, almost exclusively in some regards, an Israeli point of view, one that's kind of dictated by the military, using Israeli spokesmen, Israeli military officials, retired military officials to comment, to analyze, to give their opinions in a way that's not offered to the other side in terms of balance of coverage. And most importantly, again, not providing any context whatsoever, treating this situation as October 7th as the beginning point in a conflict that's 75 years old, more than 75 years old. But, you can start with 75 years. That would be a good start, or even the 56 years of occupation. So it's been very shocking to watch the framing of this issue in the Western press. And I don't think, as a journalist watching it, I don't think we've done a good job or adequately served the situation. And that, it does a disservice to everybody in terms of the information that they're being fed.
Yeah, thank you so much, Omar. But I want to ask you also, when we talk about these dominant frames and some of the issues that you highlighted, like being one-sided or not balanced enough or all of that stuff, have you seen any kind of differences or discrepancy, let's say, for example, between European versus American media, or even within American media itself, between some outlets and others, when it comes to the way they are handling and covering this crisis?
I don't pay as close attention to the European press. I've watched the BBC a bit, and the various American news outlets. Some of them, again, not all of them across the board. Again, I have a very hard time watching the American broadcast media. I do it as a professional, but not as a consumer as much, because I find it, again, the information. I don't do it for information purposes, but I do it to watch how the narrative is being shaped. And I haven't seen much of a difference across the American media landscape. One person remarked to me the other day that CNN today is like watching Fox in terms of what they are receiving, the information that they're receiving, the one-sided information, and that is quite unfortunate. So you don't see that much. Although on certain channels, MSNBC, you do see anchors there, television hosts that have a much more nuanced opinion. So I have to give MSNBC credit to some regard in that sense. But other journalists, they don't do a good job pushing back, demanding answers from their guests. Who, I was watching. Gosh, what was I watching? I was watching some Israeli official, talking about how everybody is responsible for Hamas's actions because they all voted for them. Well, I didn't see the journalists say, well, the last elections were held in 2006, that 50% of Gaza's population today is under the age of 18, and that even those people that voted, again, Hamas got 30 to 40% of the vote back in 2006, and that that would require you to be over the age of 36 to have possibly voted in those elections. So you're talking about, a small segment of Gaza that could have voted for Hamas, and yet everybody's responsible. Again, the journalists didn't even push back on any of that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of thing that we're seeing that's very wrong, shameful, and dispiriting, and I think is a breach of journalistic professionality and ethics. So it's a shame to see that.
Thank you so much, Omar. Mike, I'll come to you with a question about social media and digital media, taking into account your expertise in the area of cybersecurity. And did you see some kind of discrepancy between the handling of this crisis in mainstream Western media compared to the handling across different social media and digital media platforms?
Mm-hmm. So I think we've definitely seen some issues with social media management during this war. I also want to just say that I agree with everything that Omar has pointed out. And I think, especially speaking of MSNBC, Mehdi Hassan deserves an incredible amount of credit right now for speaking independently, differently from most of his colleagues. But, I think on social media, the greatest concern is this tension that has always really existed between journalism, between getting it right and getting it first. And oftentimes the people who are first to break a story on social media are the ones who get the credit for it, who get the followers, who get the likes and retweets. And that's fine when the stories are accurate. It's not fine when the stories are less than accurate. I think you saw this recently in an example of a video of a woman who was claiming to be inside of Al Shifa Hospital, claiming to be a doctor inside of Al Shifa Hospital, saying there's fighting, the Hamas is fighting in here, everyone needs to get out of the hospital right now. And shortly after this video went viral on social media, you had actual doctors from Al Shifa saying no one has met this person. The way she's pronouncing ha and Hanas is clearly not actually Arabic. And so people realize, this video seems like a hoax. And I think that's really the biggest problem with social media is, even though it kind of democratizes information, it gives everyone access to more information and the ability to take information they find and share it. It is it does not go through the same factual review process. That is why journalism is such an important job, to make sure that, there's the matter of making sure that there isn't some journalistic editorial agenda, but just getting the facts right and making sure that you've double checked your sources is so important. And it is something that I think there's been a lot of weaker journalistic standards in terms of both reporting on negative stories about Israel and negative stories about Palestine. I've seen a lot of things that go through where I say this editor should have waited a few more hours and double checked this in all cases.
So basically prioritizing speed and just getting things immediately out at the expense of fact checking, which is very important, because we're going to be talking about misinformation and disinformation later on in this episode. But let me ask you a follow-up question, Mike, about the difference between different social media platforms. Obviously, they're not all one size fits all. We cannot put them all in the same basket or under the same umbrella. So we have seen, for example, complaints by pro-Palestinian activists and, citizen journalists saying, oh, Meta, Facebook has been removing a lot of our content. Our accounts have been suspended. The content has been deleted or removed. But we have seen a platform like X, which is former Twitter, allowing much more space for diversity and inclusion and just allowing all different opinions across the board to be represented. Elon Musk said, I'm not going to censor or suspend any kind of content. Can you please comment on some of the discrepancy across different social media platforms?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Omar might have actually tweeted about this, mentioning that Elon Musk has said that he wants to ban the statement "from the river to the sea" from Twitter. And I don't want to get into a debate over whether "from the river to the sea" means this or that, but I think it's clear that a lot of people, when they say "from the river to the sea," they don't intend anything violent from it. So it is a very political choice of Elon Musk to say on Twitter, "from the river to the sea" is now hate speech. That's a really aggressive move to take. And he hasn't just done this with "from the river to the sea," he's done it with decolonization as well. And this is also at the time as a bunch of advertisers have left Twitter because, one, Elon Musk has parroted an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory known as the Great Replacement theory, that Jews in America are trying to bring minorities into America to spoil the white race. Elon Musk has tweeted back at somebody endorsing this theory saying, yeah, that sounds completely right, which is disgusting and completely unacceptable from someone who owns a social media platform. So, I think Meta deserves a lot of criticism for these stories and a lot of this scrutiny. And I really hope that they repair some of the damage that they've done here. But I think every platform has a lot of work to do, a lot of lessons to learn from this chapter in history.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying they have both of them have issues. Like social media platforms, it's not like black and white. This one is good, this one is bad. Each one of them does have its own shortcomings, if I understand you correctly. Omar, you want to add something or say something?
Well, I was going to second everything Mike just said. I think that was very important. I was going to raise that issue with Elon Musk that it has been far from perfect, and he has jumped into the conversation himself. I've seen it multiple times, but especially the latter one, which Mike highlighted, which is saying, "Well, I won't allow this comment "river to the sea" or any conversation of decolonization on my platform." Which I saw Ishan Tharoor of the Washington Post say, decolonization is the experience of most of the world over the past 100 years, like, the kind of defining experience. And so you're going to say that this is a genocidal, he called it genocidal to call for decolonization or from the river to the sea, without any kind of understanding of what those things mean or their context. So I think that's important. But one thing I wanted to kind of add to what Mike said originally was about the factual review process. Mm-hmm. Because it is important. Obviously, that's one of the things that separates traditional media from social media, and even within traditional media, the best of traditional media versus sites that have come online in more recent years and don't have that either the capabilities or the interest in getting things right. But there's something else. I mean, and you kind of alluded to it when it comes to social media. Social media might not have those safeguards, but in effect, it does have those safeguards, like the example you brought up. Because when that woman, for example, made the fake video, an Israeli woman making a fake video of a nurse inside a hospital in Gaza, she was immediately pushed back on by numerous people on social media saying that this is wrong, this is a fake accent, this is blah blah blah, and she was exposed for that. Whereas I don't see the traditional media sources doing a lot of that pushback. Mm-hmm. Again, the thing that you brought up. Sorry, Sahar, you didn't bring it up yet, but we saw yesterday, this former State Department official harassing, a street vendor in New York, who exposed who that person was. It was people on social media immediately. I mean, I watched it happen in real time. People find out who is, somebody asks, who is this person? And, within a few minutes, oh, this person, it looks like they were a State Department official for the Obama administration, his full background, and exposing that person. So you do have a kind of democratization, both in the information that's coming out on social media, which is vitally important because we wouldn't really know what's happening in Gaza without social media. Mm-hmm. And that has been extremely important in reshaping the narrative and pushing back on the kind of official narrative that's come out within the traditional media platform and from the Israelis and from the American political establishment. And so I think the role of social media has been crucial over the last 6 weeks.
Very important points indeed. And I think it's very ironic that social media has been doing more fact-checking than the mainstream, media, which is supposed to be more professional and to follow the fact-checking rules and other professional standards and ethical considerations. But it seems like, and I agree with both of you on that social media has been doing more of that fact-checking and more of that revealing of the truth compared to mainstream media. We'll come back to this very important conversation right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
As the weather gets colder, it's a good idea to layer up with scarves, hats, and mittens. Another layer of protection this season is to get your flu and COVID-19 vaccines. You can get both vaccines at the same time. Talk to your healthcare provider or learn more at michigan.gov/COVID-flu-RSV and layer up for some added peace of mind. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
When you're looking for the best in optical care, Dr. Imad Nakash is your doctor to see. With years of experience and thousands of successful procedures performed, you can trust your eyes to Dr. Imad Nakash. See Dr. Imad Nakash and his professional staff for your eye care needs. There's 2 locations to serve you. In Hazel Park, call 248-336-3937. 248-336-3937. In Rochester Hills, call 248-299-3937. That's 248-299-3937.
Get ready for an amazing experience at Ishtar Restaurant on 15 Mile Road in Sterling Heights. Enjoy excellent hospitality from owners Ali Al-Baghdadi and Fatty Bonham, serving the best in Mediterranean food. Try Chef Ali Al-Baghdadi's famous shawarma, the best Iraqi grills and food, and the best Arabic and international dishes. Dine in our authentic atmosphere or take out. Call 586-698-2585 or check us out on Facebook. Ishtar Restaurant practices all CDC guidelines and is open every day 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Have an amazing experience today at Ishtar Restaurant, 3625 15 Mile Road, Sterling Heights.
This is Dr. Sahar Kamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arabs Network on all social media platforms.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Kamis, and we're talking today about the most important, most timely topic of the day, the Gaza crisis. We're going to talk about covering Gaza, media frames, disinformation, and conflicting narratives. And with me this morning discussing this important and timely topic are Mr. Omar Rahman, who is a fellow with the Middle East Council on Global Affairs and an experienced journalist, and Mr. Mike Sexton, who is a cybersecurity expert and also an expert on Middle East affairs. Omar, I want to ask you a question as a follow-up to what we have been talking about right before the break. Have you seen any kind of spillover from the realm of social media into the realm of mainstream media, meaning when, people start to see different images, different coverage coming out of Gaza on social media. And we've seen all of these, pro-Palestinian protests in the streets and marches in many different parts of the world, in Washington, D.C., many American cities, and also capitals around the world. Do you think this has had some kind of impact or some kind of effect on Western media coverage? Did you see any kind of shift, even if a small one or a gradual one, in terms of how they're handling the coverage of this crisis?
Absolutely. I think it's had an effect on multiple fronts. One, it's, I don't want to use the word complemented the Western media coverage, but it's challenged it to an extent and challenged the kind of control over narrative itself. Because again, what's coming out of Gaza has kind of disrupted a lot of the, Israeli narrative, U.S. political establishment narrative, and that's been represented very well in the media in the mainstream media over the past 6 weeks, but especially in the early period, because the absolute death and destruction being, meted out on the Gaza Strip and its people, challenged what was happening and showed that this was not a targeted campaign against Hamas as Israel was portraying it. The overwhelming amount of burden was taking place on the Palestinian people, civilian population itself, including children. I mean, the shaping of the narrative itself, especially, but what's coming out on social media, what people are being exposed to in terms of the death of children, the videos of all of that has been absolutely profound, I think, in shaping public opinion writ large, because it's impossible to turn away from that or to adopt or accept, kind of the mainstream point of view or narrative on these things when you're seeing children, being obliterated, when you're seeing children, crying out for their parents and their whole families have been killed. So that's been very difficult. So that's one aspect of it. But I think there are multiple in terms of, the democratization of information, all that kind of thing, in which social media has played a role and a check on, I think, the mainstream narrative.
Mm-hmm. I've also seen some shift, for example, maybe some more voices coming out of Gaza, more humanization of the Palestinian citizens, not enough, but definitely better than what we have been seeing at the beginning of the coverage. And maybe that is a spillover or some kind of impact from the coverage in social media, being carried over into mainstream media, and also the pressure of public opinion in the US as well as internationally might have been a driving force behind some of these gradual and small changes and shifts over time. Also, Omar, a very important point to talk about is the conflicting narratives. You would hear one story, for example, about, from the Israeli side, Hamas is using the hospitals as a place in order to have some kind of human shield, and they actually have some kind of military bases or facilities or tunnels under these hospitals and mosques and, refugee centers. And then Hamas is denying all of these claims. We have seen so many examples of conflicting narratives in the midst of this crisis. How can the ordinary citizen, just the average citizen who is not a professional journalist, not a professional expert, actually navigate these kinds of conflicting narratives and find out for himself or herself where the truth is?
It's very difficult. It's difficult for your experts, let alone your average person. But at least, your expert comes in with more context and the ability to filter information. So I think it's much more difficult for your average person to filter and know what's accurate and what's not. And I think they're having to muddle their way through it and do their best and take, sources they trust, as much as that is possible, and use that. And so it's part of the reality of today's information space, information landscape, which is you're just being bombarded with information from all types of sources, from all types of mediums, and you have to come to your best judgment on what's going on. So it's very difficult.
Definitely, easier said than done. We talk about the concept of media literacy. We have to be media literate. We have to master our tools and skills, but definitely easier said than done. I'll come to you with the same question, Mike, which is basically, how can I, as an average citizen, suppose I'm not a professor of communication, don't have a background in journalism, I'm seeing all of these conflicting narratives, which leads me also to a question I want to specifically ask you about misinformation and disinformation in the midst of this crisis. If you can kindly first give our listeners and viewers a definition of these two terms and how they're different from each other, and then give them some kind of viable guide to be able to navigate this conflicting and sometimes fake and false content around this crisis.
Yeah, so the distinction between misinformation and disinformation, I would say, is misinformation is just general inaccurate information that is misleading people, but that doesn't necessarily come with an agenda. It could just be poor reporting. It could be that someone misrepresented something that is in an article, but not out of malice. Disinformation is more intentional. So like we mentioned, the fake video from inside of Al-Shifa hospital with the fake doctor, that would be disinformation. That is an actual hoax that someone created with a political purpose. So that's where I would kind of clarify that distinction. And I mean, if I could do any, I think, well, one thing that's really important is to make sure that everybody is fully aware that not everybody in Gaza supports Hamas, and anybody who is suggesting that should not be in a position of leadership. It's an appalling position to take and just justifies like absolutely horrendous military action. There are organizations that are trying to speak to Gazans who are criticizing Hamas's leadership and management and governance, like the Center for Peace Communications, that are showing that distinction between an everyday Gazan and a member of Hamas. But I think if I had any advice for anyone trying to navigate the conflict right now, I don't think anybody should give 100% credibility to something that either comes from Hamas or that comes from the IDF. And I won't, personally, my personal point of view, I think the IDF is a little more credible than Hamas, but I don't think that the IDF is 100% credible. No one should think that a military in the context of a war is as credible as an actual independent journalistic source. And so in both of these cases, I think people need the media literacy to be able to understand this reporter from inside of Gaza. Have they been in a position to write critically of Hamas before October 7th? And they need to be able to say, like these CNN journalists, can they independently verify that those guns were not behind the MRI machine before they showed up on the scene? They can't be entirely sure. And so they need to caveat what they say by saying, we got this from IDF military sources. So I think that's really the biggest challenge, is everyone is understandably very emotional and passionate about this war. But it's very difficult to be able to enter this and understand through that expert lens that the truth is very difficult to discern. And it takes time and it takes patience. And it takes this skepticism, again, across different forms of media, and across different lenses that the journalists are coming from.
Absolutely. But there were also some clear, blatant, disinformation, misinformation that has been spreading around, people saying and taking it as a fact, as if it's a fact. Hamas has decapitated babies and cut babies' heads and burned their bodies and raped women. And, when asked about presenting the evidence, the facts, like we've been talking earlier about fact checking and presenting the facts, where are the facts that prove this kind of stuff? We have seen even President Biden himself repeat the same stuff. And then the White House came up and said, oh, President Biden did not see any of that firsthand. He was just basically repeating the things that he was told by Israeli officials. So when things like that happen, these types of examples of misinformation, disinformation, obviously they do have a lot of damaging effect on different sides, on different parties. How can we possibly maybe protect not just the average citizen, but even anybody who uses social media or is trying to spread content through social media in the midst of such a very inflammatory, very sensitive and explosive situation?
Mm-hmm. I think, again, it's important to be patient and open-minded and, continue following up to read sources. With respect to the babies, the Israeli Prime Minister's office has published the images on Twitter that I've looked at and can confirm there are babies with their heads off. As for the rape allegations, there is sworn eyewitness testimony to rape, as well as evidence of women with their pants down found at the music festival in Re'im. It's been difficult. There's a long Haaretz report about why the forensic process that is normally carried out to investigate rape has not been possible in response to October 7th because of the sheer scale of the casualties, that they weren't able to prioritize getting actual forensic evidence of rape, in addition to just the contextual evidence of, again, women with their pants down, and sworn eyewitness testimony that is available and has been published for people to review and assess this in their own view, whether or not they view this as credible.
Yeah, of course, in the midst of such a conflict, all of these types of claims can also be contested from the other side. People can push back and say, can be staged photos. I know there was this Canadian person who contested and really kind of argued back that these incidents have happened, and she questioned the incidents of rape, and she was fired from her position just for basically saying that these incidents of rape did not happen from Hamas fighters. She lost her own position as a result of that in Canada, and she was working in the area of sexual harassment. So again, that's a time when everybody needs to do due diligence in terms of fact checking about everything that's coming from every side, and make sure that you're really looking at quote unquote enough evidence so that you are not contributing to the spread of misinformation/disinformation. We'll come back to this conversation right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
With more than 30,000 successful in vitro fertilizations, IVF Michigan is now ranked as one of America's best fertility clinics according to Newsweek magazine. IVF Michigan fertility centers are the recognized leaders in high-quality fertility care. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 9 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. A founding member, American board-certified Dr. Nicholas Shama, is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. He has performed over 20,000 successful IVF cases, and it's helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. When it's time to get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at one of America's best fertility clinics, call IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio toll-free at 855-952-9600. 855-952-9600. Life for Relief and Development has now been rated as one of the best charities for humanitarian aid. Life's humanitarian projects span the globe, and Life is celebrating its 30th anniversary of providing essential life-saving aid to people and communities in 36 countries, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. Where there is life, there is hope. And when disaster occurs here or around the world, including being one of the first responders to the Turkey-Syria earthquake crisis, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. We are looking to help the earthquake victims, and we take 0% overhead on emergency donations. So please help improve these efforts. Learn more about our involvement to help the helpless and bring hope where it's needed most, and make your tax-deductible donation to Life for Relief and Development now at lifeusa.org, or call 248-424-7493. That's 248-424-7493.
Are you going to start a restaurant or grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arab Network on all social media platforms.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis, and we're talking today about the most important, most timely topic, which is the crisis in Gaza. We're talking about covering Gaza, media frames, disinformation, and conflicting narratives. And with me this morning discussing this important and timely topic are Mr. Omar Rahman, who is a fellow with the Middle East Council on Global Affairs and also an experienced journalist, and Mr. Mike Sexton, who is an expert in cybersecurity and Middle East affairs. Mike, I want to come to you with a question about the power of documentation. You know, in the midst of the Arab Spring, young women would say, I will use my cell phone camera to document any incident of harassment. If a man tries to harass me or an officer tries to jail me or arrest me, I'm going to use my cell phone to document that. We have seen some of that also in the midst of the unfolding crisis. We have seen the incident that Omar referred to earlier of the former Department of State employee who was actually one of the advisors in the former Obama administration harassing this street vendor on the streets of New York, and it has been captured on video, and there have been now consequences for him, in terms of losing a certain job that he has been associated with and possibly facing charges. And the woman in New York who has spilled coffee at the face of a Palestinian father for wearing the, Palestinian kufiya and actually being part of a pro-Palestine protest. These incidents have been caught on camera and have been documented. Can you comment on the power of social media and digital media when it comes to documentation by average citizens and how that is playing out in the midst of this ongoing crisis?
Mm-hmm. I think in those cases you mentioned, they're very good and important to demonstrate. I think in any of these circumstances, when someone is hearing about it after the fact, it is hard to imagine what would prompt someone to just go on a random racist tirade against a street vendor or to throw coffee at somebody. It boggles the mind why someone would ever do that. So it's good to see that this documentation is forcing these people to face the consequences for their actions. I think it's good as well within Gaza to document what is going on that is outside of the scope of what CNN is able to capture from the back of an IDF jeep. But at the same time, I think it is a bit of it is a double-edged sword. A lot of some content that gets thrown out there is coming from Gaza, is actually from Yemen or Syria, and I worry. I think overall the atmosphere of everyone pulling out their phones, wanting somebody to say something offensive once some argument over Israel-Palestine comes up, I worry it is a little bit toxic, and forces everybody to be more aggressive than they need to be. But I think social media is best, if for nothing else, for giving the general public a voice to be able to speak up. So that way, I'm just thinking in particular recently of an Israeli government minister. I'm blanking on the exact role, but had published an article in the Jerusalem Post calling for essentially the resettlement of Gazans outside of the Gaza Strip, which is the definition of ethnic cleansing. And it's shocking and abhorrent that anybody would ever sign something and publish that, especially in a newspaper that I otherwise really respect. I think it's good that social media gives people the space to express their outrage and say that's completely unacceptable. This person should not be in charge of a military campaign. And that forces then journalists to ask the White House or to ask the Prime Minister's office, is this the official position of the Israeli government? And force them to take a stand and say no. There's some principles. So I think in that sense of democratizing, giving people the space to express their valid feelings, social media is a really powerful force in this war.
Absolutely. And we have seen how it has been shaping global and international public opinion around this whole issue, like all of these marches and protests going out and people, speaking up in a way that would not have been enabled by the mainstream Western media coverage for all the reasons we mentioned and we have been talking about earlier in this episode. Omar, we know that words matter, and we have seen the rhetoric around this whole crisis shifting and changing over time, historically. Like in the past, people would talk about the Israeli-Arab conflict. Then it became the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Then it became the Israel-Gaza conflict. Then it became the Israel-Hamas conflict. Like these kinds of words, this kind of rhetoric, what do they tell us and what does it mean? And what are the implications and consequences for them?
First of all, let me just say something about documentation and how important it is. It's not just, the street vendor episode or the coffee episode. Obviously, we wouldn't know what's happening really in the Gaza Strip if it wasn't for people, average people, journalists as well, local journalists, filming what they're seeing and send it out on social media. Because of, Israel has prevented journalists from going into the Gaza Strip to report, one. And then obviously the situation is so dangerous because of the bombardment that it's almost impossible for outside journalists to go in there and to report. And so that has been crucial, absolutely crucial in providing information to the public that consumes media, especially through their social media. And we see the major break in the difference between those people who consume their media through traditional media channels and those who have done it through social media. And they have helped shape what the journalists are doing, because journalists also consume or gather a lot of information from what they're seeing on social media. And we saw that with the Al-Shifa thing, and I can get into that. But I know you want to focus on narratives. Obviously, these kind of narratives are important because they shape how people think. And so, when it comes to the Arab-Israeli conflict, the reason it was called the Arab-Israeli conflict for a long time is because there was a deliberate attempt to shut the Palestinians out of it and to deny actually that the Palestinians even existed, that they have any kind of political agency or political identity, that they were merely a refugee crisis, a humanitarian crisis, that there is a particular Palestinian national identity. That was crucial for the Zionist movement and for the state of Israel after 1948. That changed over time because the Palestinian national movement reorganized itself after 1948. Its partners in the Arab world helped center the Palestinian cause as the center of what was broadly described as an Arab-Israeli conflict. No, it's not just Arab-Israeli. It's really, it hinges and pivots on the Palestinian cause. And so the Palestinians had to force themselves, against the odds and against, a counter narrative that they were part of this struggle, and that that this was really about them and their quest for liberation, for freedom, and for self-determination. So it has been shaped over time. When we're getting to the point of a Hamas-Israel conflict, and even the word conflict itself, a lot of scholars today are pushing back on that word itself because there is a concern that it implies that there are equal parties to this, that there is, it glosses over or distracts from the fact that there is an occupier and occupied, that there is a state and people under subjugation from that state. And so people are very concerned with words and how they shape points of view and how they shape opinions and all this kind of stuff. So even the word war as applied to what's happening now, is a war between state actors, between Israel and another state? No, it's between Israel and the people it occupies and an armed group within that is resisting its occupation. Whatever you think about Hamas and its version of armed struggle and its tactics that it employs and the use of terrorism or whatever, we have to understand that this is not a war between two equal parties or even between two states itself. And so words definitely matter in terms of shaping perspective and point of view and all that kind of stuff. And it's, the words that are being used are deliberate often, sometimes not, but more often than not, they are deliberate, used to kind of shape and skew how people absorb the information that they're hearing. Even the word occupation itself, this kind of thing, these are loaded terms. Sometimes they have basis in international law and they're used for a particular reason, and sometimes not. So, we have to be very careful in how we consume information and the words that are being used and all that kind of stuff. And often, most often than not, it's the powerful party that is shaping the narrative by choosing the terms that are used to discuss the issue itself.
Absolutely, words matter. Even words like apartheid or words like genocide create all sorts of controversies and all kinds of feelings and emotions on all sides, and sometimes create even some kind of pushback against the usage of these particular types of words, because words do matter. Mm-hmm. We'll come back to this very important conversation right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Dana, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted, and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arab Network on all social media platforms.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis, and we're talking today about the most important, most timely topic of the day, which is the Gaza crisis. We're talking today about covering Gaza, media frames, disinformation, and different types of stories around Gaza and the Gaza crisis and the conflicting narratives around it. And with me today discussing this important and timely topic are Mr. Omar Rahman, who is a fellow with the Middle East Council on Global Affairs and a seasoned journalist, and Mr. Mike Sexton, who is an expert on cybersecurity and Middle East affairs. Before going to the break, Omar, we're talking about words matter. We also should say context matters. So we want to talk about the lack of contextualization or the decontextualization of this particular crisis. When people talk about, quote unquote, the unprovoked Hamas attack, right? Obviously, context is different from justification. It's not a justification, but it's a contextualization, right? People don't understand, okay, what made this group do this? What is the context? What is the background? People don't talk about, for example, the occupation, the history, the historical background, and so on. Can you highlight this particular issue of decontextualization and its ramifications and implications, and why context particularly matters in the case of covering this particular crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I've been shocked by the decontextualization that was the dismissal of context by the press, by the political establishment, particularly in the West. And I think part of that is the reason is when you brought up context, the Israelis got angry because context does not kind of serve their agenda here, and it makes them look bad to an extent. But if you dismiss the context, then what Hamas did seems, again, whether you justify it or not, but it seems completely outrageous and out of the blue. And that's a problem, right? October 7th did not happen out of nowhere. Context is important. I'd like to say that, context doesn't justify everything, but you can't properly explain anything without it. It's a must to understand what's happening. And it's not just the past 100 years or 75 years of conflict here, but even the immediate months beforehand. I mean, we're talking about a year in which the most far-right government in Israeli history came into power, full of extremists that were putting a tremendous pressure on the situation as a whole, in which it was bubbling up, and in the context of the regional normalization, all these kind of things were a factor in what happened, and yet they were kind of dismissed right away, or at least recontextualized in a way, especially with normalization, the Abraham Accords, which made Hamas, the situation look a particular way. But context is extremely important. We cannot forget the 75 years of colonization. There's a reason that 80% of the Gaza Strip are refugees, right? That has an effect on how all of this has played out. It has an effect on the situation. The last 56 years of military occupation, the last 16 years of a brutal siege on the Gaza Strip. All of these things are at play in the kind of unfolding situation on the ground and lead up and aftermath of October 7th. And again, not just in the past and what led up to October 7th, but in terms of the response from Israel itself. Can we understand the end game of what the Israelis are doing if we don't understand the context in which they're operating? Israel had come to a certain terms with Hamas in its governance of the Gaza Strip over the past 16 years. It came to rely on Hamas in what one Palestinian scholar called a violent equilibrium. It was not their choice necessarily, although for Netanyahu and his political agenda, it played a role. I mean, he cultivated Hamas in its position in Gaza Strip to divide and conquer the Palestinian. This matters, the Palestinian polity. And so that really matters. And when you're looking at the Zionist movement, the trajectory of Israel over time, its colonization of the historic Palestine, and the dilemma it faces in terms of a demographic and political dilemma in which it faces today, what it's orchestrating in the Gaza Strip is a result of those type of decisions in which it's tried to excise Gaza and its 2.3 million Palestinians from its demographic calculation. And it's tried to do that in various ways. And now, using the pretext of October 7th, is trying to do it again. So as we look forward into the future, and we look forward into what's happening in the West Bank, which we should not ignore, all of these things, this context is extremely important in understanding the direction that things are taking. And so we cannot dismiss context, not just in understanding the past, but in looking towards the future.
Omar, I cannot help but ask also a follow-up question that was not on my initial list of questions, but it just came up now in my head. The image also of neighboring Arab countries, like the image of Egypt, the image of Jordan, right? The image of other countries in the region, countries like Saudi Arabia, what you mentioned now about the normalization, and then that was halted or put on hold, at least for now, between Israel and Saudi Arabia, because they cannot move forward with it in the midst of this ongoing crisis, obviously. Very quickly, what do you think are some of the ramifications in terms of the image, the framing of the image of these countries, like how Egypt is being seen and portrayed, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, these countries that are supposed to be like the Arab countries, the Muslim countries, how are they being seen in the midst of this unfolding crisis?
Being seen by who? By their publics, by the Western press, by what?
By the media, as well as by their own publics and the international public.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say exactly how they're being portrayed in the West, but in the Western media, I have seen questions around, well, why don't the Egyptians, for example, accept, the flow of Gazans into Egypt and, just to protect them from the bombing? Well, there's a context, there's a history here, right? In 1948, the majority of the Palestinian people were expelled or fled the War of 1948. But Israel did not allow them to return to their homes for the past 75 years because the creation of the state of Israel as a majority Jewish state was incumbent on that expulsion itself. And so there's a fear both among Palestinians that what we're witnessing right now, what they're experiencing right now, is an attempt to finish the job, the remainder of the Palestinian people, and put them out of the population, but also from the Arab public point of view, from the broader regional point of view, that Israel, once they bring those people into their country, Israel is now going to allow them back into the Gaza Strip, for example. And this will be complicit in what's happening. It will be destabilizing for those countries as well, that Israel Egypt doesn't want to accept millions of people and the destabilizing effects of that. The same with Jordan, from people from the West Bank. And so this is the kind of historical context in which these countries are operating at the moment, and that's an important factor in their decision making at the moment, based on what is happening in the Gaza Strip.
Absolutely. And again, context matters. If you don't have this kind of context in mind, then you are not seeing the actions or inactions of some of these countries in the right light, because you are lacking the necessary context for this particular explosive situation. Mike, I'll end with you with a question about the future. We talked a lot about some of the things we don't like about the coverage of this crisis, how it is being portrayed in mainstream media versus, social media and digital media. What could be some of the tools, techniques, and pathways that we can possibly adopt and really keep into consideration in the future should, God forbid, similar explosive situations erupt in the Middle East region or elsewhere, in terms of our handling of news and information, and how can we possibly avoid some of the fatal mistakes and pitfalls we have been talking about?
Mm-hmm. I think that one thing that is just so important is consciously cultivating relationships with people that you disagree with, but who you respect, who you can read what they say and say, I may not agree with you, but I'm glad that I know your opinion and you've told me things I did not know. Because I think that is the most elusive part of this war, is that there is no end to the amount of context. There are some things that, we should see with all the context. And then there are, oftentimes I think times when when I should be able to dispense with context and ask myself, the IDF just struck this refugee camp that looks like it collapsed a tunnel system underneath, but they also collapsed a city block. Is a city block worth collapsing for that military target? People shouldn't assess these things individually as well as in context. People need to, I think, always have an open mind and realize that none of us has all the facts and all the answers. And the best thing that you can really do is, be authentic to your own perspective. Don't distrust your judgment, but always think of people who are coming at it from different angles and think of what they have to say and be open to changing your mind.
Absolutely. That's at the individual level, which is very important, and being opened up to other ideas, other alternative stories, narratives, and different viewpoints is very important. I really had in mind also the professional aspect. Like many times I get asked the $1 million question: can there be any kind of quote unquote regulation mechanisms put in place in order to try to prevent or at least decrease the amount of misinformation and disinformation that gets spread around every time there is some kind of inflammatory issue or crisis like the one we are witnessing now? From a professional point of view, that of a cybersecurity expert and so on, can we possibly think of any kind of control mechanisms to decrease some of these damages and avoid some of these disadvantages moving forward?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I wish I could think of something quick and easy. But I think what really inspires me is there's an organization in Israel, this grassroots called Standing Together, Omdim Biyachad, which is basically Israeli Arab and Israeli Jewish, and says that Hamas and the extremists in the current government who want to expel Palestinians, all of these people need to be gotten rid of. We're all going to be living here. We need to get it out of our heads that we're going to bomb or expel anybody from either side. And I think these kinds of moments where people are able to focus not on their conflicts, but their mutual interests, and trying to just seek out those voices and elevate them during this difficult time is honestly the most productive thing. It's not the same thing as, a political policy option. But I think those kinds of, endeavors to breach across these divides are so important right now.
I cannot agree more. They're definitely important, but unfortunately, in the cases of wars and conflicts and crisis, the media adopts the motto of when it bleeds, it leads. It focuses more on bloodshed and killing and violence and extremism, and it does not give enough space for such voices of reason and moderation and balance and peacemaking to be dominant in the field. So that is something that definitely we need to keep in mind moving forward, giving more space to voices of moderation and balance and peacemaking, and not to allow the voices of violence and extremism and radicalization to dominate the scene. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. I'd like to sincerely thank our guests, Mr. Omar Rahman and Mr. Mike Sexton, for all the useful insights and excellent answers they've given us today. Thank you so much, both of you.
Good to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Shukran. And many thanks to all our listeners and viewers everywhere. Stay blessed and goodbye.